Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to another episode of Basagan ng Trip. Ako si Leloy Claudio. I'm your host. And today, ang guest natin is another person I think who needs no introduction. He's a writer, he's an academic, he's a professor. You see him a lot on TV, you see him in the newspapers, not just local but also international. A good friend of mine, dekada na kami magkaibigan, ito si Richard Hidarian. Welcome to Basagan ng Trip, Richard.
Salamat bro. Ayan, tumanda na tayo. Nag-usap tayo. But...
So ang gusto ko sana pag-usapan ngayon is the Philippines from an international lens. And what I mean by that is not just Philippine foreign policy, but looking at the Philippines relative to other countries and locating the Philippines in the politics of the world. Pero yaman lamang na Basagan ng Trip yung pangalan ng show na to.
Right.
Lagi tayo may binabasag na trip. Richard, in terms of foreign policy or thinking about Philippines in the world, ano yung trip na about the Philippines na gusto mo talagang basagin? Yung parang misconception about Philippines na gusto mo basagin.
Yeah, I mean, I know a friend of ours has a book on this, right? And actually, I use the same title also for some of my articles. One of the things I hate hearing whenever we discuss our own country or other countries, other folks discuss us, is that we're a small country. We're not a small country. I mean, we have close to 120 million people, right? So it's a top 20 tayo in the world in terms of population. We're in the top 40 in terms of GDP nominal, GDP PPP, we're I think top 25 by some estimates. So the Philippines can be a credible and legitimate middle power, kind of something like Indonesia or Australia or even Canada. I think in the distant future, in not so distant future, if we get the right leadership, if we have the sense of confidence. So kasi ito yung point ko, we always try to look at ourselves as underdog. Look at how we watch, for instance, yung mga Gilas Pilipinas game. We forget the fact that we're one of the strongest teams in Asia, right?
Hindi lakas hindi lakas puso eh. So parang laging dehado.
Hindi husay eh, purong puso. And we see that in politics also, some camps tend to, kaya I always make it feel fun na hindi pwede purong puso lang ang Gilas. Kailangan ng diskarte, kailangan ng height, diba? Physicality and strength, diba? So I think we have been stuck in this parang self-victimhood, this kind of we're always underdog kind of mindset. When in fact, I think we can be quite influential internationally in terms of geopolitics, in terms of economics, right? So that's one thing that really annoys me whenever I say, oh, we're a small country, dapat ganito tayo, dapat ganyan. Kaya one of the things you appreciate about the Marcoses, right? There are many things not to appreciate about them. And you have also pointed that out, is this sense of ambition, of being more than the, let's say, the little brown brothers of the Americans, right? That kind of, that whole, let's say, discourse. So I think that's one thing that I really don't like. The other thing that, I keep on, hearing about the Philippines throughout the years, I don't know, it's that, ito, iritang-irita ako dito, Lelo, yung Filipinos want celebrities in their politics, or Filipinos are, they don't take their politics seriously. And I said, like, wait, what? An American is telling me that? Like, hello, your president, this is Trump time era, like he never served in any political office in the past. And then now, how dare you to judge the Philippines for being a celebrity-obsessed...
Oh, kahit yung presidente natin, kay showbiz president natin si Erap, nag-mayor, nag-senador, di ba?
Yeah, he went through the process, right? He climbed the ranks. Unlike Trump, who was a reality show guy, we don't even know if he's a billionaire or not. Many people believe that he were brilliant because the president. So if you want to, pull that thing on us, I'm sorry. Like your countries are just as colorful as ours when it comes to that. So there are many, I think, Orientalists, portrayals of the Philippines that really annoys me when we have the discussion of the Philippines. People forget that Manny Pacquiao barely got few million votes, right? He's the biggest celebrity that perhaps the Philippines has produced. So what does it say about us, right? And not to mention Cesar Montano, Richard Gomez, a lot of the celebrities didn't make it. So maybe you want to emphasize Robin Padilla, and I'm channeling my Robin Padilla form. We forget about a lot of the celebrities who didn't make it to the top offices. And a lot of not so, I mean, Lenny Robredo was unknown commodity back in 2015. By 2016, she was the vice president.
Kasi Rapi Tulfo, open question kung artista ba siya or hindi, or celebrity ba siya, di ba? Kasi you can say na public service yung trabaho niya beforehand.
No, he's kind of like Rush Limbaugh of the Philippines. I look at him that way. So he's this kind of conservative pundit, law and order guy. And he's a phenomenon. I think the Tulfos are a phenomenon. They have been a big force in the Philippines. And since Duterte, they have been much more mainstream. and now they're in top offices of the government, whether in the cabinet or in the Senate. All right, anyways,
Pero
my point is,
just going,
I really like that. Thank you for that question. So, basagan natin ang trip ng mga tao. Yes, we're not a small country, and no, we're not the only celebrity-obsessed country. I'm sorry, look at your own presidents before judging us.
balikan natin yung una since trip ng mga Pilipino yung binabasag natin sa show na to. Tagalog tayo, hindi naman natin binabasag yung trip ng mga puti. Yung idea lagi na parang ang hina ng Pilipinas, and also yung if something bad happens to the Philippines, it's a lot worse than whatever is happening elsewhere. You knew this was coming.
Right.
I'm gonna talk about debt now, di ba? We're at 60+% debt to GDP ratio, and the media says that the debt is ballooning. And yet, if you look at the debt to GDP ratio of Singapore, it's 128%. If you look at the debt to GDP ratio of Austria, it's 70%. Of Albania, it's 67%. Of Morocco, it's 64%. And yet, I don't think the media is talking about the debts of these countries as if it's ballooning, as if it's going to fall off a cliff already. And yet, because it's the Philippines, it's so bad, it's so crappy dahil Pilipino tayo. So masyado talagang in a way masyadong negative yung Pilipino. So if somebody comes in and says, okay, Philippine greatness, benta sa atin yan. Which brings me to what I really want to talk about today, which is the prospects of foreign policy under Marcos. Nabanggit mo na nga kanina, one of the interesting things about Marcos is they're trying to negotiate. They like this image of the Philippines as a player in the international sense.
Right.
Now, Richard, to what extent is that fantasy, and to what extent is that possible reality?
Actually, ngayon, lalo na, I just realized now, mahirap pala kung yung host mo madaldal rin. Like, apparently, this is how you feel when I interview. So like, yeah. Yeah. So let me start from the very beginning here. Let me first of all say this. I mean, you coined this term, you call this Filipino exceptionalism, right? I really love it because that's true. If you talk to a lot of Filipinos, like they think that Pilipinas lang ganito, tayo lang pasaway, tayo lang ganito. And I say, I mean, it super annoys me, Lelo, when I go into a meeting and then the first thing they show is, this is the traffic rules in the Philippines. This is how people drive. And then I say, just go to YouTube and type Delhi or Mumbai traffic.
Yes.
Then you will have an idea of how bad our traffic is. Like, do you know what you're talking about? Because the problem with us Filipinos is that we only know our country and then we compare it, we only compare our country to developed countries. We don't compare our country to other developing countries or less developed.
Singapore.
Exactly. At meron pa tayo yung what tinatawag ko na Singapore envy, right? Parang walang ganyan sa Singapore, right? Like everyone in the Philippines wants to be Singapore. Lee Kuan Yew is the most cited political figure in the Philippines. Not Duterte, not Marcos, not Pinoy. Lee Kuan Yew, both sides. Both anti-Duterte, pro-Duterte, everyone is citing Lee Kuan Yew. No, I cite Lee Kuan Yew on Marcos, for instance. Now, obviously, going back to this debt and foreign policy issue, we're not Sri Lanka. In fact, Leloy, I've been saying year after year after year, forget about debt trap. Because the Philippines is not even getting much of an investment and utang to begin with, right? Everyone's keep on saying, no, malubog tayo sa utang, magiging Sri Lanka tayo. Sabi ko, where is the money? In fact, my term for that, Lelo, is pledge trap. Nauto lang tayo ng mga Chino. Sabi niya, mag-invest kami ng 24 billion dyan. Si Tatay Digong naman, no offense to him, ilang bansa bang nabisita niya aside from China nung hindi pa siya presidente, di ba? In the past, I don't know, 10 years. Parang Taiwan, China lang, di ba? So he was taken for a ride by the Chinese. That was very, very clear. Not much investments came in. So if you look at the Philippines, our fiscal situation has not been too bad for a number of reasons. And one of those reasons is that we're really not getting much of an investment. You know what I'm saying? So by default, wala tayong problema masyado. Kasi yung mga kapitbahay natin, Malaysia, ang laki ng investment nakuha nila sa China. But under questionable circumstances. Kaya nga, nagkaroon ng debt crisis issue under the Mahathir administration. And as you may know, I interviewed Prime Minister Mahathir even on that issue of debt. But in the Philippines, I always felt that was not an issue. Now, going to the issue of debt, ganito kasi, Lelo, you know, I mean, I know your stance is, let's put things into perspective. Obviously, we're not Greece, 200% of the GDP. We're not Japan. We're not Sri Lanka. But
we're not even Singapore.
Or Singapore, right? But the first thing you have to keep in mind is you have to make a distinction between foreign debt and domestic debt.
Yes.
Right? Japan, for instance, The ratio is very high, but most of it is domestic debt. So it's
Mm.
Japanese people, right, lending money to their government. So that's very different from, let's say, Sri Lanka or Greece, who were borrowing money from foreign creditors. That's number one. The second thing to keep in mind, Lelo, is foreign credit under what conditions, right? Because it's one thing you get a 3% interest rate or 4% interest rate. It's another thing you get 1% interest rate or 2% interest rate. So for instance, Japan, when they invest, sometimes they give you 1% interest rate. Very, very concessional loans, right?
Mm.
China gives more like market, market rates, 3%, 4%. Then the third level, of course, Lelo, is does the investment comes from with strings attached or some questionable provision? For instance, Justice Carpio talk about national patrimony provision na kumbaga kung mag-default tayo dun sa debt ng China, dadalhin tayo sa Chinese court at pwede sila let's say, sequester ng ating strategic assets, right? So that's my point. You're absolutely right, Lelo. When it comes to debt, the problem with us is that we don't deconstruct it. We just say high debt is bad, low debt is it. But the other thing, of course, we have to also keep in mind, Lelo, is that, you see, if a country like Austria runs a high level of debt, it may not have as much negative impact on their credit rating as a developing country, which is not very promising background, running debt at. So, in short, the thresholds are different. Let's say if Austria runs a 90% GDP to debt ratio, they may not get the backlash from financial markets the same way that the Philippines might get that at a far lower threshold of, say, 50, 60%. So do you get my point? I agree with the variegated view you have, but I'm going to even make it more complicated and say, with the Philippines, I'm slightly concerned. I don't buy the Dominguez argument that we need crazy fiscal consolidation, but I also don't buy the Benjamin joke na is like, kaya natin yan. Like, actually, we might have a problem with stagflation coming in. I mean, gas prices are insane in the Philippines. I'm sure also.
Supply. I don't think the problem. I'm not saying there are no problems. I think the problems related more into yung mga food security issues, supply issues, ganyan, as opposed to yung absolute percentage ng debt, which Secretary Dominguez responded to by saying we should sell government assets, we should consider raising taxes, right? And then Diokno comes in and says, well, no, we're more expansionary than that, which again is hinting at the possibility na, even within the Duterte administration, ang variegated yung opinions about how to run the economy. In that when Diokno taking power is already evidence of kind of more fiscally expansive Philippine government. And I personally, I prefer Diokno over Dominguez on an ideological level. But sorry.
He's an economist. He's a real economist. He's not a businessman lang.
Bago tayo matrap dito sa discussion ng debt, which I'd like to come. Balik tayo dun sa gusto ko talaga yung pag-usapan. This idea of the Philippines being a player in international policy. To what extent is it a fantasy? To what extent is it possible under a Marcos administration?
Right. So this is where I'm going to put on my international relations theory kind of hat, no? If you look at the Philippines, actually, we have been classified as a middle power and quite a high level. So there was this study by a Dutch think tank that actually classified the Philippines as a mid-tier middle power. Because yung mga middle powers, may high tier, lower tier. So high tiers could be something like Australia or even say Japan, right? Philippines is kind of mid-tier. Actually, we do much better than most of our neighbors in ASEAN. Bakit kamo? And that's where actually I'm indebted to you, Leloy. No, you have done fantastic series. I mean, in one of your books, diba, you really discuss the contribution of the Philippines to the establishment of the United Nations human rights regime. So we, the Philippines, right, we have been a big element in the establishment of the post-World War order, right? We were not just America's little brown brothers. We were a force to reckon with. And you have written also extensively on that, the debates between Carlos P. Romulo and the Nerus of this world, and how the Philippines, we were a force to begin with from 1950s onwards. And in many ways, we have been one of the most reliable partners of, let's say, the coalition of liberal democracies around the world. And I'll tell you this, Leloy, I was in 2016, I was in Brussels, right? I've done many of those trips in recent years to explain our presidents. Probably I'll have to do more of that soon. I remember in 2016, I met a high-level EU official, and this is when Duterte just won, no? And he came to me and said, look at this advertisement that some of our colleagues were making. And that advertisement was this: Philippines EU, bastions of democracy. Like, partners in promotion of human rights, etc. Philippines, rising tiger economy, right? And then he look at me and say, where do you think we're heading under Duterte, right? And obviously I said, I'm not sure about that, right? So
Ano to,
what I'm
2016 pa lang to? 2016,
2016,
2017?
2016. So actually, in fairness, by the time of President Aquino, we were already a middle power player. Lelo, let's not forget the Philippines is the first and only country that took China to international court over the South China Sea disputes. And the South China Sea is potentially the battlefield of the 21st century. The massive resources, the strategic location. It's at the heart of US-China competition in the Indo-Pacific. And guess what? The Philippines was the country that actually had the guts to take China to international court. But more than that, I'll tell you, Lelo, yeah, and please, I hope our listeners are not looking at this in a partisan fashion. I'm purely focusing on this from a IR theory perspective. Don't worry, I have things to say about Duterte and Marcos that are not too bad too, right? Going back to this, Aquino also was one of the few leaders in Asia that actively called on America to play more important role in this part of the world. This is the time when Obama was launching his pivot to Asia.
Sabi ni Aquino, seryosohin mo yan.
Seryosohin mo yan, ayusin mo yan, kailangan namin yan. But even more, Lele, I'll tell you this, we also pushed for Japan to play a more important defense role. So if you remember, Aquino gave this important speech, historic speech before the Japanese Diet, and essentially said, no, you are not the problem anymore, unlike Second World War, right? You are not.
Pinibigyan na namin kayo, okay na.
Tapos na, right? You're not, and that Japan can actively contribute to international peace and security. And Shinzo Abe, who's like the big guy about overhauling Japan and making it normal country, meaning no more constitutional restriction and projection of power, etc. He loved Aquino. I mean, Aquino visited Japan like 7 times or something like that. Super close sila. Marami sa mga Japanese projects ngayon na nag-credit grabbing iba. Simula yan ni Aquino yan eh. Na-sign nila ng 2015, yung subway sa Manila. So don't worry, Lalo, maybe after 5 years may subway na tayo sa Manila. Yung mga North-South experience. Lahat yan, a lot of that, really a Pinoy. So I would say the Philippines was becoming a player. Now, going to Duterte, we became a player but in a different way, right? We became the disruptor-in-chief of Asia, right? Duterte comes in and he goes completely 180 degrees to the other side. Yeah, exactly. He gave the middle finger to everyone. He goes to China. Even the Chinese were shocked. He goes there and says, it's me, Russia, and China against the world. Tapos ako parang, paano North Korea, Syria? Parang inichepwera mo sila, nauna sila sa'yo.
Diba? Kahit yung Chinese mo, ayaw maniwala, di ba?
Like, what's going on? Right? They would call me. So I was in China in early 2017, giving a talk sa Tsinghua University. And I could see all of them were watching me to like decipher this mystery of Duterte. How can this happen, right? So over the next 5 years, I had to explain to the Chinese, wag niyo seryoso, hindi masyado si Duterte. Like, he doesn't control foreign policy also. It's the military, etc. I wrote an op-ed on New York Times, not Duterte's personal army. So my argument held. I predicted that the military and defense establishment will make sure Duterte doesn't wildly go in another direction. But that's the point. That Duterte made us also a player. I don't think his execution was as good. I think sometimes it looked like he wants to change US for a more predatory, for a predatory alternative. But in a way, the level of interest in the Philippines just shot through the roof. I remember, again, going back to you, see how such a nice guy I am, right? Remember, I think someone quoted you as saying, I think it was sent to us, we had a talk and Leloy said, Philippine studies is now essentially Duterte studies or something like that, right? Like,
yung kay Mark Thompson din.
Yeah, exactly. Like, ang ganda nun eh. Parang true yun eh. Like, suddenly because of Duterte, everyone is interested in the Philippines because as much as I have 100% respect for President Aquino, the problem though was many people still saw us as an appendage or addendum of America, right? But when Duterte came in, suddenly the Philippines was up for grabs. Suddenly the Philippines is fluid, is exciting, no? And over the next 5 years, internally, it's also fluid. You had situations whereby Teddy Boy Locsin comes out on TV and says, may binibigay silang agreement sa amin, joint development, ayaw namin sign yan. Gusto naman pro-China yan. Like, where do you get that, right? And then Lorenzana openly calls China bully and all of that. He never gets fired. Unlike in US, Matis had to go. So suddenly Philippines is so exciting because the domestic is crazy, the foreign policy is crazy. So let me tell you, my friend, we are a player for better or for worse. The question is, how do we use that card, that attention that we get? I mean, I lost count of how many invitations I get all around the world talking about the Philippine foreign policy and all. Which brings us to Marcos, diba? Because I think Marcos is in a unique situation of pulling off, to use the Hegelian term, negation of negation, right? Making sure we don't have the shortcomings of the Aquino era and the more traditional Filipino president, but also we curb the excesses of the Duterte era. And so far, I know people are going to criticize me, so far, so good. You see, if you look at the key positions that have to do with our foreign policy, DFA and DND, both of them went to people who come from the ranks. In the DND, we have General Boy Faustino, right? Who was the AFP chief before,
Is
head
he
of
going to be
army.
like a Lorenzana type DND, you think?
Very similar to Lorenzana. But the difference is, maybe here I'm a bit biased because Secretary Lorenzana has been a good friend. We have been in constant conversation over the years. The thing with Lorenzana, that he's a special guy because Lorenzana spent a decade in Washington, D.C. as our defense and veterans attaché. So he knows very well American politics, and he's very, very familiar with think tank world, the wonky world. Kaya nga, nag-hit off kami kaagad because I talk like the CSISs and, you know, the Brookings and all. He's very familiar with that. I don't know if that's going to be the case. I hope with General Faustino it's going to be the same because Secretary Lorenzana was very open to dealing with think tank people, very, you know, policy intellectual people. Let's hope that will continue. Remember, the DND was supposed to go to Sara Duterte, right? Multiple times. So that's one thing. And then sa DFA, Marcos is doing something which is even better than the all previous presidents, at least at least in the recent history. He puts Enrique Manalo, one of the most veteran, respected diplomats you ever can imagine, as the head of the DFA, when so many others, loyalists, opportunists, high profile, high rollers wanted that position. But no, in the end, he goes for a career officer, which I think is the best thing to do for us. And you could see in the first weeks after winning the presidency, Marcos immediately sends a signal, I'm not Duterte. In what sense? Under Duterte, chismis yan ng mga cabinet ni Duterte na parang parating andon yung Chinese ambassador whispering daw
Oh
to
my
Duterte.
God.
Parati daw. Nagsabi pa nga bad breath daw yung isa. Ay, hindi ako nagsasabi yan, ha? Medyo cabinet niya yan. Ay, hindi ko na sabihin sino, ha? Parati andun. Sabi, may nag-joke nga kung pupunta ka doon sa logbook ng Malacanang, purong yung Chinese ambassador nandun, perfect attendance. So, Marcos, first few days, he goes there and he meets the Indian, the South Korean, the Japanese, and the American charge d'affaires and ambassadors, right, who are there. And he has 3 high-level exchanges with the Americans just weeks after winning the presidency, even before his inauguration. Biden is the first foreign leader to call him, and he recognizes that. He says, see, I'm called by America, no problem.
At saka inimbita na pala ni Biden to Washington.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and Wendy Sherman, the number 2 in the State Department, reassured him, your court cases in America is not going to be an issue. And Lelo, on the record, I told people a month ago or so, hindi magiging problema yan kasi may konsepto ng sovereign immunity. Because I remember very well Narendra Modi, the tatay of India, right? He was implicated in the pogroms in Gujarat in the early 2000s. Maraming namatay doon. So he was allegedly involved. I'm not going to pass any judgment on that. So actually, he was denied visa in the US for a long time. But once he became prime minister, inayos nila. Planchado na yan.
Oh, iba yan. Hindi yan parang Bato de la Rosa, Senator of the Republic. Iba daw
He's president of the Republic. They have to deal with him. And Marcos is very much aware of the sweet spot, strategic sweet spot the Philippines finds itself in. Thanks to Duterte, we showed that we are a wild card. Thanks to Aquino, we showed that we can also be a bastion of rule of law and be a reliable American ally. So Marcos is saying, which version of the Philippines you want to get? Come and deal with me. Let's get it on. That's what he's doing right now.
Pero itong idea of Marcos's own version of independent foreign policy, it's not a retread of Duterte. In a way, it's a kind of tribute to his father, di ba? Because remember, ang unang nag-open ng isa sa mga pinakaunang American allies na nag-open ng diplomatic relation. Actually, ang pinakaunang American ally na nag-open ng diplomatic relationship with China was Ferdinand Marcos. You can check me on that kung siya yung pinakauna. Definitely siya yung isa sa mga pinakauna.
Depending on how you define ally. Yes. So 1975, bumisita sila. So you see these pictures of Mao Zedong and Imelda here and Bongbong here. All right. Hindi na siya baby, medyo malaki na siya. 1975 pa lang, right? Not even talk about 1980s, right? Na naka-camouflage and all siya. So you could see Marcos was a master synthesizer on multiple levels, right? Especially on foreign policy, I would say. As I said, my stance on Marcos' human rights and democratic and economic record. In fact, I'm more critical on his economic record than you. I think that's where I'm even more critical. But on foreign policy, you can call me revisionist, but I think Marcos did a very good job for the Philippines. So if you look at it, he used yung mga dating membro ng Partido Komunista ng Pilipinas to open communication channels with the Soviet Union, right? And there were diplomatic missions to the Soviet Union and with the Warsaw Pact countries, Romania, etc. At the same time, we normalized...
Paliwanag lang natin sa viewers natin kung ano yung Warsaw Pact.
All right, so let's not forget Marcos Sr. was the president in one of the worst times to be a Southeast Asian, right? You have Vietnam War, Third Indochina War is about to come, Korean War was just behind us, right? Crazy time, right? Tapos nag-aaway yung mga Ruso at saka Amerikano, right? With the Chinese playing both sides, right? So that was the situation right now. So Marcos essentially comes in here and say, okay, we're
Warsaw Pact essentially yung ally ng Soviet Union.
So on one hand, you have America and its allies, the NATO North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So it extends from essentially America all the way to Turkey, right? All of these countries, right? And then on the other hand, you have the Warsaw Pact, which is Soviet Union, Russia, and Central Asian countries, and Ukraine. And then Warsaw Pact also extends to Central European countries, Eastern European countries, Poland, Hungary, Romania, Czechoslovakia back then, all of these kind of countries, right? So what Marcos did was this. Okay, mga Amerikano nandito, pero kung umaasa lang tayo sa mga Amerikano, wala tayong makukuha dyan kasi they'll take us for granted, right? But if we open communication channels with their rivals, right, and multiple centers of power, we have leverage, right? So he opened economic and social communication channels with the Soviet Union, and then also he opened communication channels with China, and then later on was among the first U.S. allies to normalize ties with them. But as of course you know, Lela, I mean, that was also important because my communist insurgencies at home. So if we can make friends with their patron abroad, baka babawasan yung suporta sa kanyang mga headaches at home. So it also had a national security aspect to it, not only foreign policy aspect.
And of course, yung mga Amerikano na yun, yung assumption nila at that time was that so the Soviet Union and Russia, the Soviet Union and China, their only goal was to spread communism. So if you deal with them, sasaksakin ka nila sa likod, they're going to promote communist insurgency in your own country. And the insight of Marcos was, they're not as ideological as they were before. There's a kind of foreign policy realism at play. And you can see this in the interview niya with William Buckley, which I recommend people listen to. In the middle of the interview, he's like useless. He just orates. But towards the end of the interview, where he explains foreign policy, dun lumalabas yung utak ni Marcos.
Brilliance niya, no, on foreign policy. Yeah, I mean, Marcos himself was a realpolitik guy, right? And he could read it in others, right? And he knew that there was a Sino-Soviet split already, right? After the death of Stalin, Mao Zedong comes out and says, hey, why should we be second fiddle to the Soviet Union, to the Russians? We can be a force of ourselves, right? And as you have also written, China began to flirt with third world countries. Kaya nandun si Zhou Enlai, nandun sa Bandung, etc. So Marcos was smart. He realized, puro kunyari lang mga ideological, but these guys are brutally realpolitik too. And just read the history of Russia, you know why, right? It's a tough place to rule, right? So he was good in exploiting those things. But
and also he had good, even on foreign policy, because we tend to think of technocrats as just those economic managers, diba? Actually, at that time, this was the height of Carlos P. Romulo, who was at the height of his powers kasi ang dami na niyang na-serve na presidente, gamay na niya yung takbo ng international community before, and people respected him. So if Marcos sent him abroad, they knew who CPR was, and they knew that he was speaking for the president, and he could really negotiate for the president.
I mean, you can say Kissinger was the white Romulo, right? I mean, not Romulo being the Kissinger of Asia. Nauna si Romulo. He's a Pulitzer Prize winner. He headed the United Nations at some point. So So I'm saying like
If
Romulo was really
Romulo were alive, he would have loved that statement, Richard. He was a very
right,
big
exactly.
fan
Yeah, Kissinger is the Romulo, the white Romulo, right?
he would have adored
That
that
kind of
statement.
sounded wrong. Romulo of the West, let's put it that
Uh,
way. It's the Romulo of the West because I think nauna siya, and I think was a brilliant guy. No, I mean the thing is this, Lele, where I think Marcos was also very, and this is where I think his son is taking notes because he's always in the shadow of his father, and sometimes not necessarily for bad reason. You see, in speaking of Kissinger, there's a reason why I suddenly brought Kissinger into conversation as much as I see some parallels with Romulo, is that in the 1970s, the Americans had a big worry. Alam mo yung worry nila, Leloy? Na ang Pilipinas ay masyadong active sa West Philippine Sea. Kissinger was scared that the Philippines was becoming the bully in Southeast Asia, right? Remember, we built yung airstrip sa Pag-asa late 1970s. Paano ni Marcos to? Nauna tayo sa China, nauna tayo sa Malaysia, nauna tayo sa Taiwan. Ginaya tayo ng mga ibang bansa na yan. Sinong gumawa nan? Paano ni Marcos yan? So Marcos had the foresight to know that this will be a military theater down the road. This will be a geopolitical landscape of competition down the road. So in the 1970s, biglang Kissinger was worried, like, nako po, itong mga Pilipino, medyo mayabang sila, binubuli nila yung iba. Siyempre, America was also playing different sides, Vietnam against China, Malaysia. So they didn't want to be dragged by the Philippines into war with other potential partners in Southeast Asia. So what happens is that, and this is a root of one big problem we have in the US, which kind of helped Duterte. Kissinger talks to Nixon and they come up with a doctrine. The doctrine is strategic ambiguity. In theory, we're allies with the Philippines, but we'll never clarify whether we'll come to the Philippines rescue kung nagkaroon ng hidwaan ng Pilipinas at mga ibang bansa sa West Philippine Sea. And the worry was because the Philippines was keep on pushing the envelope. In fact, the term Kissinger used was carte blanche. His fear was, we don't want our alliance with the Philippines to be used as a hammer by the Filipinos to keep on getting islands away from Vietnam, Malaysia, Taiwan, and other countries. See, that's how proactive Marcos was when it comes to defending our West Philippine Sea. And that is why his son cannot be seen. I mean, and he understands that he cannot be seen as a pushover in the West Philippine Sea. That is why presidential election period pa lang, as much as he said, we want diplomacy with China, as much as he got ICC, ICJ wrong. Yes, I'm not in denying that. That's on the record. But he also said, I remember SMNI debate. I don't know if you watch it, but I watched it. There are multiple rounds. My finale pa sila. They juiced it out. In the SMNI debate, they spent 1.5 hours on foreign policy, which was mind-boggling, and I love it. That never happens in COMELEC debates or debates in mainstream. He said, we will deploy warships to show strength to China, dyan sa West Philippine Sea. And then, after winning the presidency, he even backed it up furthermore. He said that, they will not sacrifice an inch of our sovereignty, blah, 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 blah. Now, sasabihin mo, di ba si Tatay Digong sinabi na jet ski? This is where it comes to. First of all, Tatay Digong said jet ski only towards the end of his speech, whereby he was essentially saying, let's cut the deal with the Chinese, right? And then after he wins, it's all about soft landing. He keeps on saying, we want soft landing. We want soft landing. I don't hear any soft landing as far as Marcos is concerned. But let me also add this point. This is where I believe there are structural limitations that Marcos Jr. cannot violate. And the structural limitations are twofold. One is China's trust rating is negative 30 in the Philippines, right?
Walang nagawa si Digong about that, no? He tried his best.
He tried his best, but it kept on backfiring because the Chinese thought the Philippines is Cambodia. You got Hun Sen, everything else follows. They didn't understand Duterte is just one of the players and that the Philippines is a wild democracy. So whenever the Chinese bullied us, bullied our fishermen, what they did in Reed Bank, what they did in Whitstone Reef, average Filipinos don't listen to Duterte anymore. They listen to their conscience. They listen to their patriotism. So the surveys are very clear. China has a negative 33 approval trust rating in recent years. US has plus 70. Japan has plus 60. The other one is the military. I've conducted surveys with our friends there. I've had conversation a lot with folks inside our armed forces and all. They're not pro-US, to be clear about it. That's not true. But they're skeptical of China, and they see China as our number one external security threat. That never went away, and Duterte never controlled it.
Deeply ingrained yun.
Deeply institutionalized yan because they're training with Americans, with Australians. Their armaments, 90% of our weapons are from America and NATO grade. Kaya nga nahihirapan tayo to buy from Russia and other countries eh. Kasi
Yung may interoperability issues din kasi
you cannot have a Samsung, I don't know, Samsung keyboard then iPhone screen. It doesn't work that way. You get what I'm saying? Yeah.
Pero Richard, meron akong narinig na sa isang interview ni now President Marcos, kandidato pa siya at that time, it was with Thinking Pinoy. Sabi niya that prior to the arbitration ruling ni Noynoy, we had a modus vivendi with China. Tapos sa tingin niya, the arbitration ruling ruined that modus vivendi. So I mean, I was a bit shaken by that. Parang nakakatakot, parang sobrang pro-China nung angle na yun. That narrative is essentially a Chinese narrative. Na maayos na lahat, sinira pa ni Noynoy.
Yeah. No, I that. Probably he was talking about the mutual disengagement plan from Scarborough, which ironically was negotiated by Trillanes, right? A beta noir of their side. So maybe he was referring to that. But the reality is that it didn't work. There's no evidence to suggest that China would have been nicer to us if we were nice to China. Case in point, Duterte. Duterte has been the nicest ever thing that happened to China as far as the Malacanang and Philippines is concerned. And look at the last 5 years. The situation got worse in the West Philippine Sea. More militarization, more militias harassing us, and then Reed Bank happened. That didn't happen cannot happen under us, right? So the situation actually got worse. And ito lang kasi nasaan yung investments ng China? Nasaan? The only one I know is ito yung sa may Rockwell na mag-cross ka ng Pasig. Ito ganito yan, Lelo. It's like a 4-lane road. You go to a bridge na 2-lane, then it becomes 4-lane again.
Tsaka di ba sila rin yung Chinatown Bridge na palpak naman?
Exactly. Tapos yung worker Chinese, yung engineer Chinese, parang hello, goodbye. Yung movie na yan, parang hello, goodbye. Parang wala tayong nagawa doon, wala tayong nakuha doon, di ba? Anong big ticket infrastructure investment? Japan invested a lot in the Philippines. Thank you. Salamat sa
yes,
Japan.
yeah. Richard, let's move to the other side of this equation kasi China and US, yun yung poles na navigate ng president natin. I heard you in an interview, I think it was with Howie Severino, and you said that the Marcoses are too obsessed with their image, especially their image in the West, to just completely burn the relationship with the US. In fact, you think they'll probably repair some of the damage that Duterte did.
Yeah. Which goes back to what you were saying. I don't watch as much bloggers' videos as you perhaps. But I understand why I think Marcos was hedging at some point because I think his fear was he will win the presidency, but his mandate will be questioned because of everything right? That is why in one of his first press conference after winning, he emphasized expressly that Biden called him and Biden was the first, and that because our mandate is so overwhelming, everyone acts. So like you could see
actually, yung nakakatawa dyan na congratulate si President Biden sa kanya kaysa kay President Duterte.
Exactly. Right. Nauna pa kay Xi Jinping by 5 days, I think. Right. So you could see it. The US is playing its card very well, Leloy. I mean, this is empire strategy. So the US knows the Marcoses are looking for affirmation. I mean, Duterte will never be accepted by the West, and Duterte doesn't care about the West. The Marcoses are a completely different ballgame. They're products of the West. They're culturally West. Ganito, just to give you numbers, Lelo, in 6 years of Duterte, he did not visit a single Western capital except when he had to pass through New Zealand to go to Peru, right? Siguro nag-CR lang siya sa airport. Wala pang 6 days na panalo ni Bongbong, nasa Melbourne na siya, right? Where you took your PhD, right?
Well, pero dahil para sa anak naman niya yun, di ba? Because his son was moving.
But that's my point. His children, I mean, yung isa Oxford Brookes, yung isa LSE, yung isa Australia, Lisa, NYU, yung masters niya. I'm so New York, right? Not Cubao, but real New York, right? New York University. Bongbong Marcos, Oxford, right? And of course, both Bongbong and Sandro took their boarding school also in West Sussex, right? And you can ask our friends, Lord De Vera and all, they'll tell you, Bongbong Marcos is a kind of aficionado of underground British music. He knows genres and artists that I don't even have an idea of their existence, right? He's geek really in the music. So
a bit of a hipster.
Exactly. And then compare him to Duterte. There's accusation that he was sexually molested by an American when he was young, right? There is that Mindanao factor. America, I mean, if you want to see the dark side of America, maybe ask people in Mindanao, right? They have an abundance of memories. Duterte after remember the Mayring incident where kind of a suspected American operative. Something fishy happened with him in Marco Polo Hotel nila Dominguez yata, di ba? And then he was shepherded out by, I think, FBI, and Duterte was pissed off. A few years later, he convinces the Davao City Council to block Balikatan exercises. And he did not allow Americans to use the airbase in Davao for their counter-terror operation. So think of that, park that in the corner, and then think of what the Marcoses. Kennedys, Nixons, Reagans, Oxford, Wharton, etc. Of course, annoyed sila with the court cases and everything, but that's exactly what Wendy Sherman told him. Don't worry, as long as you're president, that's not going to be an issue for you. So they're totally...
Wendy Sherman is Deputy Secretary of State, diba? Mataas to, no?
And she's the number 2. She's the most senior deputy.
Okay.
She was also Deputy Secretary of State under President Obama. So we're talking about very senior people. We thought she could be the Secretary of State, pero Blinken ang kumuha nun. But so Wendy Sherman is not just anyone, right? So essentially, they're now negotiating his visit to the White House, which is totally different from Duterte, right? The history in Mindanao, he's refused. And remember, Duterte, saan siya nag-aral? Ay, kailan siya nag-aral? Panahon ng Vietnam War, 70s. So this is the anti-American era. You have to understand his zeitgeist, his thinking.
Tsaka yung activist milieu ng Lyceum at that time, di ba? Parang ano pa si Joma.
Exactly. Right. Joma, Nurmiswari, right? Sino mga kaibigan ni Marcos? Party people, Western people, right?
Yeah, you know,
they're just
24-hour party people, a reference that the president might understand, actually. That's
so Leloy, in short, if Duterte's are, I don't know, Huawei, the Marcoses are Tiffany and Co., right? I mean, they're completely different. I'm talking about aspiration, of course. I mean, they're the Tiffany.
Ingat ka dyan, Richard, tataba ka dyan.
I know they like the glitz and glamour, right? I mean, I think literally Amy was in Tiffany blue during the inauguration, or Tiffany green. I pay attention to those things because this is a Marcos thing, the glitz and glamour. I think it's more a Romualdez thing. I think it's more of Imelda. But that's the thing, that they're totally different ball game from Duterte's. But to be clear, China will be an element of Marcos' foreign policy because he needs the money. Because infrastructure spending is expensive. Duterte only finished, I don't know, barely 10% of his big-ticket infrastructure projects, according to the DPWH data. Saan ka kuha ng pera ngayon, di ba? With all these fiscal limitations that we're facing right now. Jokno said, tuloy-tuloy ang deficit spending, but at some point, there are going to be some pushback. And not to mention, by the way, Leloy, there's also debate within the Marcos administration. I talked to Secretary Basagan the other week, and Secretary Balisacan was saying, maybe we also need more PPP, bring in the private sector. Maybe we need more focus on health and human capital. Huwag tayo masyadong focus on hard infrastructure, soft infrastructure din kailangan natin. So, let's see where this is going. But if you're
hard infrastructure, yun yung big ticket, yun yung malaki, yun yung visible, yun yung macho, di ba?
So, yung edifice complex, which it goes back to Louis Napoleon, right? Napoleon III, right? All the way to Marcos and Duterte. I think Marcos, if he wants to continue the infrastructure build-up and kind of go with the tradition of edifice complex, he needs money, and U.S. clearly cannot provide it alone, but nor China. So I think he will try to have what you call, and now let me throw it out, equilateral balancing strategy. What I hope is that it will be a dynamic equilateral. Have good enough relationship with multiple powers, cross them over, get the most benefits, and push your national interest forward. And if he does it well, he got my 100% support on that, not on other issues, but on that.
So I just want to bring it to a close now, and I'll ask kind of like a really just big question. What are your expectations for foreign policy for the next 6 years? What are your major predictions at this point?
Wow, that's a tough one. I mean, we're talking about a three-dimensional chessboard here, right? So much will depend on what Xi Jinping will do. I think China is in a very difficult and tricky situation. They're going to have leadership transition. We're not sure if there'll be any successor to Xi Jinping. China is very problematic in terms of they're dealing with the COVID-19. So maybe
their economic growth is slowing down. You know,
slowing down. Their pandemic management is bad. Yeah, people are angry in Shanghai, in Beijing, big cities. It's not looking good. In fact, I got to know that China is now canceled. Remember, China keeps on hosting all sorts of sports events over the past 10 years. Chengdu, Shanghai, Xiamen, like they're canceling a lot of those now. So things are not looking good for China. So my fear is Xi Jinping might have the temptation to do something on Taiwan, maybe, right? In the near future, right? Now, that will affect us because we're next to Taiwan, we're US ally, will be affected. Damay-damay to. Diba? Bardagulan to eh. Kaya nga even si, what's his name? Marcos Jr., what's his name? To mention that is in the inauguration. And then with the US, most likely the Republicans will be back soon, right? My goodness. I mean, what's happening in the US is crazy, right? So, ang dami kasing wild card eh. So, let me put it this way. The steady one in the next 6 years is the Philippines, not China and the US. That's how crazy this is. Philippines is the steady one. Marcos Jr. will be the dose of sanity, considering how crazier things are, potentially in China and the US in the coming years. Kaya nga ako, I'm a big supporter of middle power diplomacy because ayoko na that our fates as nations will be determined by the whims of two superpowers. I want Australia, I want Japan, I want India, I want South Korea. I want all of them to play an important role in the region.
ASEAN, of course.
ASEAN, of course. Indonesia, Vietnam. If we don't get our act together, and now I'm going to say Philippines is a middle power too, or at least potentially middle power. If we don't do anything like that, the two elephants are going to trample upon all of us.
Tsaka I guess it needs to be said in the context of ASEAN, we're not a middle power. We're a huge player within.
Yes, exactly. We're not the grass upon which the elephants will step upon. We're the giraffes and the zebras and the lions. We can make a difference, to use the zoo analogy, right? So I don't believe we're just the grass and they're the two big. I don't believe that. Kasi ito, Lelo, just look at the numbers. Pag sinama mo yung economy ng India, Japan, and Indonesia, matapatan mo na yung China eh. You don't even... Yun lang eh. At saka China is slowing down. Indonesia is picking up. India is still growing fast because their potential is high. And I'm not going to underestimate Japan. I'm not going to underestimate Korea. So I want to end on this note because I think this is the problem we have in international relations discussion, especially in media, but also among friends. We make it look as if the world depends only on these two superpowers, when in fact, we're in such a complicated world. We have climate change, we have technological disruption, AI, and dami natin problema, terrorism, whatsoever, that I don't think either US or China are in a position to deal with them on their own. Neither of them are as relevant as superpowers used to be. We're entering a more multipolar order, and middle powers have to play an important role. And if I were the foreign secretary of the Philippines or strategy of the Philippines, I will push us to be a big player among the emerging middle powers of Asia and in the Pacific. I think we can do a lot. We got the language skills, we got the pizzazz, right? We got great diplomats, we got great thinkers. We have some weight in international events. In fact, you know what, Lele, I was recommending the Philippines should also come up with its own version of Shangri-La Dialogue. So this is a big dialogue in Singapore where every year top defense experts and defensemen, I think we should have that. Let's call it Indo-Pacific Dialogue. They should come to Manila. Marcoses are in charge, so they know how to do the glamour. Let's make the Philippines maybe not great again, but at least let us make us more glamorous and important in the region. And kayang-kaya natin yan. I'm 100% for that.
And with that note of optimism, maraming salamat, Richard Darian, for joining us in Basagan ng Trip sa ulitin.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Hope to join you next time, not at 1 to 2 a.m. I hope I was correct.
Sorry, pasensya na.
Looking forward.
Thank you.